What we're looking at now, I suppose, is where it was said that Jack Ruby entered the basement, but witness statements both up here and down in the basement really don't back that up. My contention is that Jack Ruby entered through that door, walked along the corridor, walked through the elevator and along the first floor hallway. He would have made a very quick right to a stairway which led down to the basement.
At the time that he was shot, Oswald was already heading toward a car.
Yes.
So why not just throw him in and get him to the hospital as soon as possible?
The car was right there, and it actually finally reversed into place at the time that Oswald was shot. In fact, the car had actually made contact with Jack Ruby's leg.
Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription with this video. Well, today we have a really neat interview with a man that I got to meet at the JFK assassination conferences. His name is Paul Abbott, and I actually got to hear his presentation twice before we had our in-person interview. And one of the things that I realized very quickly about Paul Abbott, not only has he written the book on the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald, but you would be hard-pressed to find a person who knows more about the moments when Lee Oswald was shot than Paul Abbott. And one of the ironic things about that is he's from Australia. He's not a man who lives down the road and can do all sorts of footwork. He has studied this from afar, and it's pretty amazing. When we look at these moments of his transfer into the police station, Lee Oswald was taken in. Notes were taken, and yet we were not given access to those. No recordings were made. It was a very odd set of hours and decisions. And the more you look, the more there is. It's sort of like a scratch and sniff, where the more you scratch into the surface, the more you smell like, what is going on here? What is happening in these moments? Well, these moments here are the ones we are going to be discussing. The vehicle that was set up to transfer him. What happened in the basement? Who all was there and what was happening? And what exactly were the details that we should pay attention to when we get to these moments of Oswald finally coming out, handcuffed to Jim Lavelle in just the last few moments of his life? Now, Paul brings up a breadth of varying topics. And so I want to encourage you. I actually considered whether or not this interview should be broken up into two parts. And I'm going to leave it as one for the sake of the record, but also so that you guys can access it all in one dose. But it may be something, I just want to encourage you, it may be something that you, like me, benefit from hearing multiple times. I know for me, hearing Paul speak Wednesday at a banquet, and then another day at the conference, and then again, the morning that he and I did this in-person walk around, I really had a lot of things sink in deeper. I just want to encourage you, that actually is a way that mirrors what I do with books, which is if I was going to read you from this book, well, I read it myself and underline or take notes. Then I read it aloud to you and talk through it on camera. And then I'm editing, so I'm rehearing the same information. And then sometimes I go back and listen the morning that I release it just to make sure that things weren't ignored or forgotten in the editing process. So I'm usually hearing material at least 2 and sometimes 4 times in order to get it clear in my brain. So I would encourage you, if you hear this interview and you think, boy, that's a lot, then my encouragement to you would not be to shut it off because it's a lot, but to actually listen a couple of times and just let it inform your thinking, because Paul Abbott really knows his stuff. Now, other thing I want to point you toward is on his website, he has created a spreadsheet that has a resource of Garrison documents. Jim Garrison files and papers. He has made sense of them. He has created a database that is for researchers. So I will link those in the comments below. But for now, I want you to enjoy and intake this in-person walk around at the place where Lee Oswald was held his final 48 hours of life to his death in the basement. Okay, so today we are here with Paul Abbott. And Paul, where are you from?
I'm from Perth, Western Australia.
Yeah, so we get a wonderful accent today on the channel. And in addition to that, tell us how long, as an Aussie, it seems, unusual that you'd be into this case. So how long have you been into it? And tell us how you got into the case.
So all told, I think it's 31 years that I've been fascinated by the case of President Kennedy's assassination. For me, I first found out about it when I watched the Men Who Killed Kennedy. So that famous British, ironically, documentary from the 80s. I was absolutely captivated, and from there, natural progression was to watch JFK, read on the trail of the assassins, Gary Shaw's cover-up, Larry Harris as well, and really, growing up in Australia and kind of around when the internet started, it was pretty tricky to find too many books that quenched my need for knowledge, other than encyclopedias and things like that. So. I've been fascinated and really haven't contributed much to the research community until probably more recent years. So it's so cool to be here.
That's something that you talked about in your talk that I heard was the Garrison Files. Yeah. So can you explain for those who are interested, what are they and how can you access them?
So they're the surviving documents of Jim Garrison, former New Orleans District Attorney's personal documents. They have everything in there that includes memos and notes and all things to do with his 1960s investigation into the New Orleans aspect of the President Kennedy's assassination. So, of course, Oswald's time there in the summer of 1963. There's a lot in there about Oswald, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, Guy Bannister, Jack Martin, Dean Andrews has a lot in there. And really, it's 181 folders just full of PDF documents. So they're publicly available. I got them from Leno Sanic from Black Op Radio. So really, when I got them, I was just absolutely amazed by how much was in there. But pretty soon, I started to see duplicates of documents, and I opened up an Excel spreadsheet and just started kind of writing names of documents, page numbers, just for my own reference. So I wouldn't go back around in circles reading the same document over and over again. And before I knew it, I kind of got into a bit of a habit of finding names pretty easily as I manually scanned each page. And before I knew it, I started a very long spreadsheet with that turned into an index, 42,000 lines of a spreadsheet. You can filter it by name, date reference, general context. So that's out there. It's available on my website to download, deathtojustice.com. Just a massive spreadsheet that hopefully, that's what it was for, was to help researchers, anyone that's interested in a particular name or anything like that, go and check it out, and hopefully that'll help people find some documents that they might not have known about before. So we're standing in front of 2034 Main Street, and back in 1963, this was the Western Union office where Jack Ruby had stepped into. It mustn't have been too long before 11:15 that morning, November the 24th. He stepped in to make a wire transfer to Karen Carlin Little Lynn, one of his strippers, who had tried to get some money from him all of that weekend, just because Jack Ruby had made it a point to close down his clubs apparently out of respect for President Kennedy. So of course that put Little Lynn and his other employees out of work for that weekend. So the story goes that Karen and her husband Bruce had contacted Jack Ruby earlier on that weekend, the Saturday, to say, look, can you advance me on some pay? I still need to be paid to make rent. And they organised with Ruby to meet at his Carousel Club on I think it was late in the Friday evening. But Jack Ruby never showed up. Instead, he had one of his employees, it might have even been Andrew Armstrong, give Carlin $5, which wasn't enough. So they contacted Jack Ruby on the Saturday that evening, or later on anyway, and Ruby said, I'll wire you some money from the Western Union tomorrow morning. How about that? So Jack Ruby actually said that he would be going to the Western Union, or he could go to the Western Union that Sunday morning to wire some money to Little Lynn. So I think that's probably a little known how true that is, because we're only going on what Karen and Bruce testified to. But if their story is correct, Jack Ruby planned to be at the Western Union office that Sunday morning to make the transfer. So Ruby walked in and made the transfer, and apparently had his receipt stamped, or time stamp written down for 11:17 a.m. by Doyle Lane, who's the supervisor. Apparently he was only tendered to Ruby because his other employees were on the lunch break, which seems strange for a Sunday morning at around 11 o'clock that people would be away from their counter like that. So anyway, Doyle Lane was who served Jack Ruby. Apparently he recognised him as a fairly regular customer, and that's what was the timestamp, was 11:17 a.m.
Okay. And you said he parked somewhere close. About where?
I believe it was just across the street.
All right, so maybe just right here across the street. And Sheba was left in the car.
That's right, and that's what a lot of people contend, that Ruby could have only been acting spontaneously when he decided to walk down or into the basement and shoot Oswald. The fact that he left one of his beloved dogs in his car, along with a whole heap of cash in his trunk and his wallet. It made it look like it was very much a spontaneous thing, where he really just came into town to to make that transfer, but he got a rush of blood to the head, as it was, and that's when he decided to go in and do what he did. That was how Ruby told it, and that's kind of the mainstream narrative. So
Awesome.
yeah. So behind us we've got the municipal building. So directly behind us, that's I guess it was commonly referred to back then as the Annex building. It was built in 1956 because the old City Hall, just a little bit further up the street, that was erected in 1914, but that fast became too small. They needed more courtroom space and even more jail space as well. So that's why the Annex building was built literally next door. The two buildings actually, as we'll see, directly connect, and they physically connect as well. You see the three floors there, first, second and third floor. They connect with the old City Hall building. There are passageways, or there certainly were back in 1963, that were only ever locked with a metal accordion style gate. So people could very easily walk between both buildings back then. I'm not sure that's the case now, because it's now a county courthouse, which is quite separate to what the City Hall building is now, which is a campus of the University of North Texas. It's their law school. But by all appearances, other than that, it's pretty much exactly how it was back in 1963.
Amazing. And there are basement levels.
Yes, absolutely. Actually two. So a basement, which, as we'll see, the ramps lead down to, and numerous staircases as well, particularly from the outside of the City Hall building. But then below that, under the old City Hall building, is a sub-basement level, which I'm not sure too many people know about, but I think had a pretty important part in the lead up to the Oswald shooting. While there's five levels above ground, under the old City Hall building, actually two below ground levels.
Okay. And then, so here behind me is the building where the Western Union building was, and we're going to go talk about that.
So where we're standing now, Jess, is pretty much where Patrol Sergeant Don Flouchet was parked at the time, leading up to what he thought was the start of Lee Oswald's transfer. Now, he was an on-duty patrol, on patrol, but wasn't actually a part of the plans to transfer Oswald. So his story goes that he pulled his car up here, put the radio on, and actually stood outside the car. So by his words, he was situated directly opposite the the entrance into the annex building. So that's where we are now. And as you can see from here, you had a very good view of the Main Street ramp where Roy Vaughan was standing. But also from here, he had a clear view of all the way down to the Western Union office, where Jack Ruby was alleged to have walked all the way from in front of the building, the municipal building, and slipped down the ramp. So Don Fluchet, he was always adamant he actually knew Jack Ruby. He was adamant that he never saw him that morning. So from this vantage point, we have someone who knew Jack Ruby, but never saw him that morning.
Yeah, that's great. And so Roy Vaughan was here.
Roy Vaughan was standing at the mouth of the ramp. Now it was contended only by someone by the name of Napoleon J. Daniels, who was a former police officer. He just happened to stop by, having seen a crowd milling around outside the entrance there, and he thought, oh, that's right, they must be moving Oswald, I'll go and stand there. And he did go up and talk to Roy Vaughan. They knew each other because he was a former police officer, Daniels. Apparently he had a cigarette while just standing there and talking to Vaughan. And a little bit closer to the time of Oswald's transfer, Roy Vaughan testified to Sam Rio Pierce, Lieutenant Sam Rio Pierce, driving a car up out of the Main Street ramp, which was slightly unusual because in 1963 that was the point that all cars entered down into the basement. Now the reason Sam Pierce drove the car up there was because the plans had changed regarding Oswald's transfer. Pierce was instructed to get in a car, have a couple of officers with him. So with him he had Sergeant James A. Putnam, and I think it was Lieutenant Billy Joe Maxey. And they get in the car and come up the Main Street ramp. And of course, because Roy Vaughan was standing at the top of the ramp guarding, Napoleon Daniels, for some unknown reason, despite what other people that were positioned along here said, posited that Roy Vaughan walked all the way out into the street here to stop traffic so Lieutenant Pierce could pull out and go around the block to be the lead car in the convoy for Oswald's transfer. Now, Roy Vaughan never said that he stepped out onto the street, that he needed to, because there was virtually no traffic here that morning. But Napoleon Daniels testified that because Roy Vaughan stepped all the way out into the middle of Main Street, that's how Jack Ruby, or a man that he described or would come to describe as Jack Ruby, who by the way wasn't wearing a hat, slip down past the concrete curbing there and just walk down the ramp. Napoleon Daniels said that he thought that it happened so clearly and easily that Roy Vaughan must have known the man, and that's why he was okay with him walking down the ramp. Well, Roy Vaughan completely disagreed with that statement. And Napoleon Daniels would also come to say that he wasn't sure after all of that if that happened before or after the shooting. So it was a very muddled statement that Napoleon Daniels gave. But Roy Vaughan was, as if you read the statements of people like Don Fluchet, who we've seen the perspective of, and Harry Tasker, the cab driver that was also parked along here, they support the fact that Roy Vaughan never stepped out into the street. And in fact, Pierce, Putnam and Maxey in the car also said that Roy Vaughan simply stepped to the side. So he never came out onto the street. He just moved aside so they could obviously pull up out of the ramp. So what we're looking at now, I suppose, is where it was said that Jack Ruby entered the basement, but witness statements both up here and down in the basement really don't back that up. No one in the basement ever saw Jack Ruby walk all the way down the ramp either, so it's a pretty hard story to believe.
So can we talk about where you believe he did enter?
Yeah. Well, it's probably from here. We're still where the Western Union building was. We can see a vacant lot there. That was there in 1963 as well. Now I'm close to 100% sure that, well, to make the timing from 11:17 a.m. in the Western Union office and to be in position down in the basement, just over there, the only other way Jack Ruby could have entered is through a side outer door of the annex building here. So it'd be pretty cool. We should go check that out.
Yeah. Okay, one more question for you real quick. While Jack Ruby is moving into position, where in the building is Lee?
So he was on the 3rd floor.
Okay.
So the 3rd floor of the City Hall building. So he was being held up there until at least just after 11:15.
Okay.
So
there, Jack is making his way. Let's go see that door.
that's right. Yeah, he was just up here.
Okay, so before we do that, we are going to go see where...
Yeah, Harry Tasker, the cab driver, was positioned. Now he was actually on the meter for one of the out-of-town reporters. Paul Cisco told Tasker to stay parked up because his intent was to come out of the basement once Oswald's transfer had started and to hop in the cab and follow Oswald's convoy to the county jail.
Okay.
So he'd set that up, and Harry Tasker was kind of positioned here on a 45-degree angle. And again, he told the Warren Commission that he never took his eyes off the basement. In fact, he went over to the top of the ramp to look for his reporter. That's what Harry referred to Cisco, because he'd been down there for a long time. So Tasker came back to his cab, sat here, and again, what he saw backs up the fact that Roy Vaughan never walked out into the street. He mentioned that he saw a man walk into the basement and then back out. But again, that was never, he wasn't definitive in terms of if that was before or after the shooting. And the description of the man didn't correspond with Jack Ruby. So again, what he said he saw kind of mirrors Fluché's account and what Roy Vaughan stipulated as well. And again, another really good view.
Great view.
Yep.
Yeah, direct.
Yeah.
All right.
You can see down into the basement.
One thing that struck me was how narrow.
Yeah.
Really not some huge space for Roy Vaughan to lose track of.
That's right. It's true. So Roy Vaughan, he was standing here the whole time.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit further out this way, but all he ever did was move over to let the car out. Again, the traffic wasn't an issue that morning. He didn't need to step out onto the road. It was just a case of the car coming straight out. He signalled it was all clear and off. Lieutenant Pierce was to take the car around the other side of City Hall. It's just cool. You can actually see in the corridor as well where Ruby would have walked. So I love it.
All right, so we came around. Here's the Western Union building. That's the front of the building where we've just come
Yep.
around from, and now we're here by this door. Tell us about it.
So we're standing. This was a car park or a vacant lot back in 1963 as well. So what's really cool is the outer door where this is to the ground floor of the annex building, and that door was there in 1963 as well. Now, unfortunately, it's hard to find photographic evidence, but apparently there was a kind of a small alleyway which connected that door to Main Street. People like Don Fluché referred to it in his statement, and I think the two utility workers, porters, that came out of there to look for a television, they testified to walking along the alleyway to get to Main Street. So we'll probably get to that story in a bit, but that door was basically for contractors, workers to come in and out of the annex building back then. So hauling things like ladders and tools and equipment, rather than go through the main entrances. It was a bit of a get in, get out kind of deal. So the story goes that around probably it would have been about 10:30, 10:45 a.m. that morning, two porters that worked across the City Hall complex, Harold Fuqua and Alfredia Riggs, they actually came out of that door in their quest to find a television to watch the coverage of Oswald's transfer. Now, the only place that they knew they could find a television was actually all the way over in the sub-basement locker room of the old City Hall building. Locker room being that's where the police personnel would come and go from the start of their shifts. But of course they couldn't get there directly because the corridors between this annex building and the City Hall building were locked. And because they'd been asked to leave the basement downstairs earlier, they didn't want to get into trouble, so they literally walked out of this building to go all the way around to the Harwood Street entrance and then work their way down to the sub-basement locker room. So this door, on the other side of it, and it's still there now, is a corridor which leads to the back of, back then was a service elevator. And in that service elevator was like a small kind of hatch that people could, move through. And once they had moved through that hatch, it was just a question of leaving the elevator, and then you're in the first floor corridors. So the two porters actually in their Warren Commission statements really map out their journey. Those names again are Harold Fuqua and Alfredia Riggs. My contention is that Jack Ruby entered through that door, so whether it was left unlocked for him or someone was there waiting for a knock, Jack Ruby walked through that door, walked along the corridor, walked through the elevator and along the first floor hallway. He would have made a very quick right to a stairway which led down to the basement, which is the car park where Oswald was being led toward, or would be led towards for the start of his transfer. The thing about the stairway was it was actually an emergency exit for this building. So the door at the bottom of the stairway couldn't lock. It was an emergency exit. So I think that potentially Jack Ruby's path from the Western Union office down the alleyway, or maybe even directly across this lot, could have been completely unimpeded. All that was needed was that door to be left unlocked, the service elevator to be left in place, which it was. The maintenance workers had done that earlier, and Jack Ruby could have got into the basement well and truly in time to be to meet Oswald's transfer. And it was right there. So we got Matt and that's cool. That's so cool. A completely unimpeded journey for Jack Ruby all the way down to the basement. And I think if we think about the timing, it could have very easily have done this in under the 4.5 minutes from the time his receipt was time marked by Doyle Lane in the Western Union office to when he shot Lee Oswald.
You said
17 a.m.
And then the exact time of...
it was 11:21. So more than enough time.
Wow. Okay, awesome.
Guys around some places as well. Yeah. That's so cool.
From left to right, we have
Yeah.
Paul Abbott, Andrew Adler, Joe Borelli, Frank Compton,
Mark it down.
and Danzig.
So this door was here in 1963, clearly left unlocked, or maybe all it took was for Jack Ruby to knock on the door and someone to let him in. Could have been as easy as that. Through here, when you look through the glass panels, you'll see a corridor to an elevator. Back in 63, that was a service elevator. This door was a get in and get out, probably the length of this ramp. Made a very sharp right down the stairway, out through the door into the basement. So just like in the movie JFK, except he didn't need to be let out down there.
There's a van, a WFAA van, basically like TV techs, who said that Ruby was milling around before,
Yep.
which would show that he had foreknowledge. He was trying to do something.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, on a whim, I'm going to go shoot the guy.
Yeah.
So you know where that was?
It was parked just out on Commerce Street, so I think it was across the road and a little bit towards Harwood Street. That description I have a bit of trouble with, because they also said that man was dressed scruffily, like he'd slept in that suit. Jack Ruby was a meticulous dresser. So that was only kind of a more of a convenient kind of statement that was made after the fact, I think. Because Jack Ruby at that same time, that was about 8 o'clock that Sunday morning, Jack Ruby was also at home in his apartment, apparently asleep, if you believe George Senator, his roommate. And he'd stayed there until 11 o'clock that morning.
Where was Jack Ruby? Where did he park with his dog Sheba in the car?
So I gather it was across the road on Main Street. So that car park that you see there, that was there in 63 as well. Now, Jack Ruby had one of his dogs and he had thousands of dollars of cash in his car, his wallet as well. I think that was kind of part of the ruse to make it look like he was acting spontaneously.
Interesting.
Because when he was apprehended, I'm pretty sure he said pretty quickly, my dog is in the car, my wallet is in the car. And I think it was, it might have been Ronald Nelson who came out to the car, searched it, or maybe Homer McGee, I'm not sure, but someone from DPD came out very quickly. There was a crack in the window, so at least the dog could breathe. But they were taken care of pretty soon.
My thought was always that, Ruby was a big dog lover.
Yeah.
That maybe he was going on a suicide mission, which essentially this was. Maybe he wanted his last couple of minutes with his dog.
Yeah.
That was my thought. I don't know if it's true or not. It's just, as a dog owner, if I was going on a suicide mission, I'd want to spend my time in it.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other thing, Paul, that I wondered after hearing you talk the other day is, there's the whole hairline question. So, do you think...
Oh, Jack Ruby with the...
Right, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so if you...
Did they lure him in and he didn't actually do it? Let's talk about it.
So if you have a look at the Bob Jackson photograph, so the famous one of Oswald at the moment he's being shot, that the hairline of Jack Ruby, it looks like it's a wig. It doesn't match, it doesn't actually line up with Jack Ruby's hairline in his mugshots. Now that's about as far out there as I get. I don't write too much about that in my book, but it kind of, if that was the case that maybe it was someone else that shot Oswald, then you've got to ask how was Ruby in place to be hauled through the jail office and taken up to the jail. That's right.
He's not wearing his jacket.
Yeah. So he's been stripped of his jacket, which no one testified to when he was being subdued in the jail office.
Well, the other thing is the bag over the head.
Yes, which would explain if it wasn't really, again, big speculation, but if it really wasn't Jack Ruby that shot Oswald, then that would explain why Detective Lewis Miller, within a second of the shooting, covers Jack Ruby.
Did you say Jack Ruby lunged?
He was propelled towards him. That's the only thing Miller ever said about that. But it's very clear if you watch the footage of the shooting, you can see Lewis Miller cover Jack Ruby within a second of all of the police scuffling and to subdue him.
A valid reason for covering the head? What reason did they give, or what reason?
It was never acknowledged. So no, the DPD were never asked about it. No one questioned it. It's something that you can only see when you slow down the footage, but it's very clear to see. So two reasons that could have been done was maybe to disorient Jack Ruby, or to cover the fact that it wasn't Jack Ruby who fired that shot. I mean, that's out there, I know, but it's in the footage, so it makes us ask questions.
Profile pictures, and his nose looks totally different.
That's who they contend was Jack Ruby in the halls up on the third floor.
I'm not a big, look at this picture, this thing looks slightly different guy.
Me too. Yeah.
Because it's just, I'm not good at interpreting that, but this was one that's like,
That's widely believed to be Jack Ruby, and people say, with the paper in the background, it's a good timestamp, and obviously all the media, that's up on the third floor. Yeah. We're still walking through the vacant lot next to the annex building.
So you're not sure whether or not they just called this the alleyway, or whether it was a vacant lot that had
I think it was a vacant lot that had a separate alleyway. So the alleyway literally, this is probably a good perspective actually. You see where we've just come from, the ramp.
Yes.
The building here kind of juts out a little bit more, so I think that indicates maybe how the alleyway was positioned back then. I don't know if there was a fence or I think it could have literally been that, which is kind of what it is now. So There's different terminology for laneways and alleyways, but I think it could have been as simple as that, because I've not been able to find any photographic record of kind of the outside of that building as of back then. But we do know that the vacant lot was here as it is now back in 1963, and would have been very easy for Jack Ruby or anyone to just literally cross over and into that outer door.
And just for those of you who aren't from here, I just want to reiterate, this is the Western Union building.
Yep.
This is the back of that annex building.
It's very close.
What's happening on Commerce?
So Commerce Street, this is where most of the crowd and onlookers were gathered. There was a lot of people across the street, because back then it was common knowledge that the exit out of the basement was up the Commerce Street ramp. So this is where most of the onlookers and most of the police presence was. There was probably upwards of about 10 police personnel that were kind of just positioned at various points along here, because this is where Oswald was expected to come out at the start of his transfer, and obviously did come out in the back of the ambulance. So if you have a look at footage from Commerce Street that day, a lot of it was taken just a little bit further up, where the Commerce Street steps are, just beyond the American flag there. But interestingly, there's some footage that a Dallas citizen took. His name is George Taplin, I believe, and he actually filmed a whole bunch of people that were standing behind these doors. And they were the City Hall employees that were hoping to watch the transfer from down in the basement car park, the eastern end. So, roughly about here, directly downstairs in the basement. But they were asked to leave by Reserve Officer Gano Worley for no real credible reason. They were employees. They were literally just standing and watching, or hoping to watch, the transfer. They weren't in anyone's way. They certainly wouldn't have been filmed, but nonetheless they were asked to move, and they all came up and stood behind these doors, and you can actually see them in that footage by George Taplin. So this is the Commerce Street ramp exit. So back in '63, this is where it was expected that Lee Oswald would be brought out, and the armoured truck was actually backed in, and it's pretty prominent in all footage that the front of the armoured truck was sticking out. Now it was never intended to back the armoured truck all the way down. It was always meant to be positioned at the top of the ramp. It's kind of become more commonly spoke of or referred to that the armoured truck almost got stuck, with the ceiling being as low as it was down the ramp. But that wasn't the case. Harold Fleming, who organised, he ran the armoured motor car company. He was the one that the Dallas Police Deputy Chief Charles Batchelor called to organise the armoured trucks to transport Oswald in. He knew that they would never fit down the ramp, so it was always the intent to leave it parked at the top. They were also a little bit nervous about backing it down the ramp anyway, because it had just been installed with a new battery that morning, so it had to be jump started. They certainly didn't want to have to execute a jump start, with Lee Oswald in the back. So it was parked at the top here, and there was actually a second armoured truck which was parked just a little bit further back down the street here, just as a bit of a backup. So they were at least organised on that front. But as we said earlier, the plans changed. The armoured truck it was decided at 11:15 that it would just be used as a decoy. So it'd still be part of the convoy, but that it would indeed be in front of some cars, one of which was actually carrying, or meant to carry, Oswald. So it's interesting when you watch the pre-shooting footage, you see reporters coming and going, in between the armoured truck. And it really just points out the security, or the lack of security. So here also,
in particular, this is not where Roy Vaughn was.
So standing here was Bobby Patterson. He was dispatched here at the same time as Roy Vaughan was to stand at the Main Street entrance. So there was a guard here, there was Bobby Patterson. Roy Vaughan was over on the other side of the ramp. And inside, guarding the Harwood Street entrance down in the basement, was Ronald Nelson.
Now, what's the pathway between the bottom of this ramp
Yep.
and the bottom of the other ramp? Is it a straight?
It's a straight line, so absolutely. So if we were to look down and through this door as it's if it was opened, we would actually see the junction of the ramp where Oswald was brought out to and ultimately shot. So cars could literally drive all the way through and up. Yeah.
And the place where Oswald was shot, was it to the left or to the right?
So down here, looking down from the Commerce Street, it was off to the left. So if we might have.
Coming down from that hill.
That's right. Yeah. So we are standing. If we look up, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that where the exact point where Oswald was shot was where these two buildings join. So this is still, we're under the annex building, whereas that was the building where Oswald spent his entire time while in police custody. So he was literally shot under where the two buildings join. And it's cool, if anyone visits here, it's obviously hard to get into the basement, but you can take a peek through these windows and see the junction. So this is a good point as well to point out where the news trucks were. So at the time, if you look at footage, there was a lot of camera cables, a lot of electric wires and things being running down the side of the basement here, through windows down into the basement in this part here, because at the basement level, I'm not sure exactly where it was, is the room where Oswald's press conference happened was just under this part. So down these stairs, that's the basement level. And it was in there that Oswald's famous press conference was held. And that's where
See it. Is there glass?
there's a door down there we can see in, absolutely, yeah. So these stairs were in place back in '63 as well. So unfortunately we can't be sure that this was secured back then either. We do know that camera cables were led, and this door was probably open to let the news camera cables and lights and everything that they would have needed for back then. But what you can see in there is the level of City Hall where Lee Oswald's press conference was held. So we think about that crowded scene. It's crazy. I think
Jack Ruby was there.
absolutely. So how did he get in there? How we think about how easy it is to walk down these stairs. If we turn around here, this would lead to the sub-basement level of City Hall. Now, I'm not sure how else it could be, but I think this is where the entrance was to the locker room, where the police would have, what they would have used to come and go. And there was a really interesting story that morning. Charles Blackie Harrison he went for a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock on that Sunday morning with another detective, Lewis Miller. That was pretty common. They went to somewhere called the Deluxe Diner just a bit further up Commerce Street. Now Lewis Miller would testify, and Harrison would reluctantly as well, but he downplayed it a lot, that Harrison spent a lot of his time at the diner on a phone. Not known who he was talking to. It was made out like it was just someone from back here in the office telling them to come back. But it's not clear how long they were there for, and it sounds like Harrison spent a lot of their time there on that phone. Now they walked back to City Hall from the diner. Lewis Miller walked back up to the 3rd floor where their office, where their bureau was, but Blackie Harrison didn't. And we know that because when he would ultimately join his fellow officers down in the basement to be ready for Oswald's transfer, one of them said to Blackie Harrison, "Where have you been?" And that was when, because he saw Blackie Harrison walk from the direction of the locker room. So he didn't walk down with them, he kind of joined, he met them down there. And Blackie Harrison said, "I've just come from the locker room just to buy some cigars." Well, because Harrison didn't go back to his office after the coffee, I think it could have been very easy for him to instead walk down these stairs and down the entrance to the sub-basement locker room. Now, why I suspect that is because down there were payphones, and down there were vending machines, but down there was also that live television, and that's where the two utility workers were heading towards, was the locker room to watch.
They went out the back door.
That's right, and walked all the way around down the Harwood Street entrance, made their way down the stairs inside to get down to the locker room. And when they were down there, they encountered an unidentified man who told them, there's no need to stay down here. It's not going to be shown, the transfer is not going to be shown on live television anyway. They never identified that man. They were asked, but they weren't pushed very hard. They said they weren't sure if it was someone that worked in the jail or if it was a police officer. I'm not sure. Now, I think that very possibly could have been Blackie Harrison, who had, at that time, very well could have easily accessed the sub-basement locker room and might have been down there to be on hand to make some phone calls, potentially to help liaise with Jack Ruby, or because they were friends and he was would come to be standing directly in front of where Jack Ruby was at the moment that he lunged out to shoot Oswald. So it's a bit of a long story there, but I think it's an important point. And again, there's no record of this all being secured as part of Dallas Police's precautions to get the basement and indeed City Hall ready for the start of Oswald's transfer. Well, probably as we come up the stairs, it's actually pretty cool. If we look down the street here, hopefully you can see it, the AT&T logo up on the building there. So that's where Jack Ruby's Carousel Club was. Not all the way up in the sky, but at the ground level of where the AT&T building is there in the background was Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. So he was super close to City Hall.
Yeah. And he gave free coffee all the time.
Absolutely. Well, there's some estimates that he knew or was on good terms with at least 900 of the Dallas police back then. Now, if you ask Jesse Curry back then, his estimate was that Jack Ruby could have only been friends with about 50 Dallas police personnel, which when you read the statements of people that were there at the time of Oswald shooting and had something to do with the preparations, it's like 3/4 of those people that were asked admitted to at least knowing of Jack Ruby or being friends with him. So I tend to believe it was more upwards of 900 that Jack Ruby had some kind of acquaintance with at least. Police officers' wives and girlfriends worked for Jack Ruby as well. He was DPD's a very good friend, I'd say.
And so by that method, then he kind of had security for his club. He had constant patrons.
Yep. And so when
employees, a source of employees.
Well, and it was an interesting thing because the FBI actually in their questions, in their first questions of Dallas police personnel, was what they would ask was, did they know, or firstly, did the Dallas police that they were speaking to, they asked them directly, did you work for Jack Ruby? Or do you know of any other Dallas police personnel who have or still work for Jack Ruby? So that kind of makes you believe that they were that they were looking for any police personnel that might have been moonlighting for Jack Ruby as part of security for his club or anything like that. An interesting question to ask so early in the piece.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
All right, so there's media around here.
Yeah, so news trucks, they would have been across the road, or maybe even, parked here. It makes sense that they would have been parked on this side of the street because, again, their camera cables ran into the building. Now, there's a story that, Jack Ruby was seen out here at about 8 o'clock that Sunday morning. Some of the news truck personnel that were in there, and the cameraman as well, who was actually on the roof filming, testified after the fact that they saw a man that they would later identify as Jack Ruby come up to the truck at about 8 o'clock that Sunday morning and ask a couple of times thereafter, as the transfer started, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? The thing is, their description also had the man asking that, and that they would later identify as Ruby, as dressing really shabbily, like he was wearing a suit that he slept in. And Jack Ruby was a meticulous dresser. So, and their descriptions of Jack Ruby are really vague. So it's hard to believe them, to be honest, because Ruby, by all other accounts, was back at his apartment that morning, in bed, and apparently didn't rise until 9:15. He had scrambled eggs for breakfast. His roommate George Senator testified to that. He took some phone calls. Who was he speaking to? We know he was at least speaking to Karen Carlin, because he did call her, or she called him, and he agreed to send $25 by way of Western Union.
I assume phone records?
Yes, I believe they do. And George Senator heard, who was walking in and out of these phone calls. He was doing his laundry at the time. And then from here, or from Jack Ruby's apartment in Oak Cliff to here, on a Sunday morning, it would have only been about a 10-12 minute drive. So it wouldn't have taken him long to get here. Generally, it looks exactly the same. Inside, it's obviously a functioning university campus. Inside as well, there are some exhibits and some areas which have kind of been preserved and frozen in time. So the 5th floor jail all the way at the top, where Lee Oswald was housed, and also Jack Ruby in the same cell, that's still up there, which is really cool. So if you Google it, you can see it. On the 3rd floor where Oswald had his mugshots taken, that part of the wall has been preserved, as well as where J.W. Fritz's offices were, where Oswald was interrogated. It's marked where that was. It's hard to get in there though. It's not open to the public. You need to be affiliated with the University of North Texas, clearly, to be able to get in there. But down in the basement, the jail office is preserved. And the point where Oswald was shot is also immortalised. You know, the steps of there's some steps that show exactly where Oswald was shot. And unfortunately, there's a wall kind of in front of that. So you can't even walk directly from the basement office out to the car park. Instead, what's there is a frosted piece of glass, which apparently clears up every 30 seconds, so you can see out into the basement, and then it frosts up again. There are screens and things running, but it's not open to the public. So it's a bit of a shame. It's a bit of a shame. But what I wanted to kind of just point out while we're here is this is the Harwood Street entrance. So again, you could probably say this is the main entrance to the building, given how wide the staircase is. But at the time, again, we see a stairway which leads down into the basement level, so underneath the stairs. Now,
Another entrance.
Absolutely. I wanted to point this out because, again, on that morning of November 24, this is how Harold Fuqua and Alfredia Riggs were actually having walked all the way around the building. I think it was Riggs that was sent down here to make sure that the door was unlocked and that there was no police. And when he found out that they could get in, he came back and signalled to Fuqua to come down. And this is how they entered to get all the way to the point where Oswald would ultimately be shot. Interestingly enough as well, Tom Howard, who was a famous attorney back then, or a notorious attorney back then, he used this entrance to get into the basement and was actually down there at the time during the shooting. So Tom Howard said that's really strange, because in a couple of hours' time he would put himself forward as Jack Ruby's attorney. So to think that the man who was Jack Ruby's attorney was actually at the scene of the shooting, that
Gotten in through an unsecured.
100%. And it's in the FBI statements. He originally came here to go and see a client of his who was in the jail. And according to Howard's statement, he got as far as the elevator. So the elevator in the jail office, which Oswald was brought down in, he got as close to that, but the elevator was on another floor, and I think by that time he was turned away. And as he was leaving back out the jail office, he said to a detective, "It's okay, I've seen everything I need to see." And then a few seconds later, Oswald came out and was shot. Apparently, Howard didn't stay at the scene. He walked back out, and he met his colleague, another attorney by the name of Collie Sullivan. He met him out on the street, and that's Howard's version of events anyway. But he was pretty close to the scene, and that in itself is a interesting little detail which not many people know.
Okay, so I have a few questions for you just from this vantage point. So 5th floor is the jail.
Yep.
About how many cells are we talking about? Was this a short-term holding place? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so short term, because obviously jails are run by the county sheriff. So technically, Lee Oswald, he could have been transferred to the county jail that Friday night, having been charged with the shooting of police officer Tippett. But no, he was held up on the 5th floor. I think there are only about 8 cells up there. So when you have a look at pictures now, you can see it's a very narrow corridor with cells on either side. I say 8, it could be as few as 6 or even 4. It's hard to tell, but very much short term.
Okay, something you mentioned in your talk that I found really fascinating was you said at the time that he was shot, Oswald was already heading toward a car.
Yes.
So why not just throw him in and get him to the hospital as soon as possible?
The car was right there. It had actually finally reversed into place at the time that Oswald was shot. In fact, the car had actually made contact with Jack Ruby's leg. So it could not be any closer, yet we all know, thanks to the footage, that Oswald was kind of swarmed over. I think he got kind of lost in the melee of the rest of the police officers trying to stop or get Jack Ruby. And they were both taken into the jail office. So yeah, like you say.
Oswald was taken from the basement ramp and then taken where?
So back to the jail office that he just emerged from.
Back just on the same level?
Yeah.
Okay.
So only a few feet, but the car was even closer, and it could have been used to rush him to a hospital, but of course that didn't happen.
And as you point out, ambulances of the time were just a glorified car.
Yeah, that's right. A wagon basically with, I think, an oxygen tank and the kind of thing that could hold a stretcher in place. But that arrived, it looks like it was about 4 minutes, maybe 4.5 minutes after the shooting. So it sounds like it arrived as quickly as it could. But of course, the 2 ambulance drivers, they certainly weren't paramedics. They took a stretcher into the jail office and very soon brought Oswald out. And you can see photos of Oswald laying on the stretcher. His left arm is kind of dragging along the floor, and he's kind of roughly bundled into the back of the ambulance, which had entered down the Main Street ramp. But adding insult to injury is the fact that the ambulance couldn't drive out of there straight away. The armoured truck was still in place, and it took, if you watch the footage, it seems like 30 seconds for it to move. So it seems like the Dallas police could not have done anything more to hinder, proper kind of first response to Oswald after he'd been shot. It's crazy.
And Dr. Crenshaw, I know in his book, he talked about that is it Ringer's lactate? Is that the name of it?
Ringer's lactate, yeah. So if someone was on standby to literally keep Oswald's system circulating, he might have stood a chance of surviving. But Oswald was shot just where the 7th rib is, and it was kind of at a downward angle because it was found under his 11th rib. So through there, it's cutting through the kidney, the spleen, the vena cava, an aortic valve that leads to the heart. It couldn't have done more damage. And what ultimately...
And there would just be one wound.
That's right. But it's amazing that there wasn't an exit wound because he was shot at such close proximity. So that's...
It wasn't stopped by a rib or anything. It just stopped under the skin?
I think it might have lodged next to the rib. I don't think if you read the autopsy, it says it's lodged just next to or above the 11th rib. So it doesn't even say that it made contact and the rib stopped it from exiting, which is amazing. But what actually killed Oswald was toxic poisoning. There's a technical term for it, and Crenshaw refers to it in his book. Because Oswald's system had stopped circulating, there's toxins that started to build up, And when they were fighting for his life at Parkland Hospital, they got his circulation system going again to try and save him, but toxic waste had built up. So when it reached his heart, it kind of overloaded, and it's like he almost died of a heart attack. That's ultimately what killed Oswald.
We read through that account on the channel, so I'll have to go back and listen.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I do that, but I do that sometimes when I want to refresh my own memory.
Very cool.
Paul, this has been amazing. I feel like I understand the lay of the land much better. In fact, one thing I didn't understand is I thought that the place that Lee emerged from was from the back, but it makes total sense that he was coming from this book.
Yeah.
So you've cleared up so much for me.
Oh, cool.
The viewers are gonna love it. Where can if somebody wants to check out your work, if they want to, I know you have a book.
Yep.
So point us to your website, point us to your book, anything else that you would point people to.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So my website is deathtojustice.com. So on there's links to my YouTube channel, which I have a collection of videos that capture the before, during, and aftermath of Lee Oswald's shooting. I have some other little things on there, some slowed down clips, of the police officer that's covering Jack Ruby with some kind of black garment, barely a second after the shooting. Just some other little interesting things on my YouTube channel. I also run a Substack, so I write some articles related to the Oswald shooting since the release of my book, and details about my book are on the website as well. So
Your book is titled?
A Death to Justice, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. So it really is tempting as it was to get wade into the details of President Kennedy's shooting and the murder of Officer Tippit. My book really is focused entirely on the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. I go into a little bit about Jack Ruby and obviously how he didn't live to be retrialed like he successfully appealed. But I get very granular about the shooting because it's a very undercovered aspect of that horrible weekend in history. But I think we owe it to, if not for justice in general, but to Lee Harvey Oswald. He didn't get to have his day in court. He was, I think arguably we could say he was eliminated, and that's not fair. And we need to see, there needs to be more attention and research done on that really cruel and I think a very suspicious and what I think is a bit of an inside job by the Dallas police at the time. So hopefully it just gets people more interested in the topic.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, we are recording this kind of on the sandwich day. The day, we are 62 years to the day. On the day where yesterday, one man lost his life.
Yep.
2 children lost their father. A wife lost her husband. To an assassin's bullet. And then tomorrow, 62 years ago, a man lost his life. And 2 children lost their father. And a young woman lost her husband. To an assassin's bullet. Really.
And I think the human element, we really, far be it, I'm an Australian, so I can only begin to imagine how devastating for American citizens back then and now President Kennedy's assassination was. But as a citizen of the world, as he referred to in his inauguration, it was a cruel and shocking act. But so was Oswald's murder, and he, like you said, he was the father of 2 children. He had a family, and I can only imagine what his 2 daughters grew up having to hear. And I still feel for them, and it was with them in mind that I wanted to give respect to how much of a travesty their father's murder was. So the human element, I think we should always come back to, in not just President Kennedy's assassination, but Officer Tippit and Lee Harvey Oswald, and indeed other political crimes. At the end of the day, they were humans that didn't deserve to die that way.
Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate this.
Thank you.
It's been great.
It's been so much fun. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that walk around with Paul Abbott. I hope you enjoyed his accent. I would definitely do. I think accents make things even more fun to listen to. If you struggled with it, my encouragement to you would be to play with the speed. Sometimes that can help us process things that we're having trouble understanding in 100% speed. You could slow it down to 75%, for example. But And then, like I talked about beforehand, you may want to go back and re-listen to let these things sink down into your mind. But I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things about the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald that was going to be done, that ended up being the moment of his death. Let me know in the comments what stands out to you, what questions you have remaining, and any other resources you have about this topic in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.